Hello, everybody. This is lesson number 66, and unfortunately, it's going to be a long one. Titled Get What You Want. Okay? How do you get what you want? First thing, you have to decide what you want. First, and that's something that most people can't do. Not 1 out of 10 people can actually decide what they want. You make a decision is something that most people can't. You ask people what you want, and they're, oh, I want a lot of money, I want a car, but they don't really know what they want. So decide what you want. Then, number 2, form a plan. There are people that kind of know what they want, but then they don't actually write down a detailed plan to get what they want. And then, number 3, execute that plan. Put that plan out into motion. Start doing the plan. There are people that 1 out of 10 know what they want. 1 out of 10 will make a plan to get what they want. And then 1 out of 10 will actually get off their butt and start doing the plan. And then the next step after you're doing the plan is you have to be humble enough to analyze your plan and make sure it's working. And if it's working, keep working. And if it's not working, alter it. Almost no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Almost no one's plan works flawlessly. So you have to constantly do course corrections. That's very important. All right? And if it's not working, adjust your plan logically. Those are the things. So I said not 1 out of people decide what they want. Not 1 out of 10 people make a plan, intelligent plan, to write down to get what they want. Not 1 out of 10 will actually implement that plan. Not 1 out of 10 will then, and this is a problem, they're not humble enough to say, well, that plan I decided isn't working, I better adjust my plan and fix their plan as they go, and then stick to it and keep grinding out the grind, as they say. Okay? You have to have clear outcomes. Take action and decide and look at this and see what you would call success. And notice if that plan's working or not and fix it, okay? You have to keep that little bit of you inside it. And there's a list of traits I wrote down that winners kind of have. First, you have to decide what your plan is and get going, whether you're a general of an army or starting a company or whatever you want to do. You also must break your plan down into doable chunks. Long-range goals, medium-range goals, short-term goals, whatever that happens to be. The short-term goals are very important so that you have a tangible proof. I even call it immediate gratification. I like the vacuum cleaners that are bagless now because I can see things coming up. It's almost like immediate gratification. So you want to have your little doable chunks of your plan in different sizes, bite-sized, bigger size, and then long-term. And do the little things, and the big things will happen. All right? Establish your guideposts and signs along the way. Keep your plan simple. As I said before, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And so your plan, a plan that's too complicated will fall apart. That's so true in fighting, wrestling or boxing or jiu-jitsu or something. If you have a move that's complicated, you're not going to do it to a good guy. So make your plan simple. Keep it simple, and then work it out in achievable chunks. All right? Next thing that's pretty important that a lot of winners do is they have a solid foundation from the start. You cannot box successfully if you don't have good road work. You cannot wrestle unless you have a minimum of strength and flexibility and things, and some knowledge of some things. Good defense. You can't box unless you can keep your hands up and jab and keep your hands up as you're coming back with punches. Don't drop your hands, and you got to move your head. One saying is nice. Move your head or somebody else will. So you got to have a good foundation with some solid basics. Another thing is plan thoroughly in advance. Now this is not a contradictory to be flexible and change your plan as you go, because no plan survives first contact with the enemy. But plan what's going to happen as you move along. History is full of stories when a battle didn't go the way people expected, and they went, "Oh gosh, what do I do?" I heard if Hitler had destroyed the British at Dunkirk, it would have changed the whole war. But he never expected that to happen. He never expected France to fall apart in a day and the whole British army to get trapped somewhere. He didn't have that. So have all kinds of contingencies. If this happens, if this happens, if this happens. So plan thoroughly in advance as what if goes on. Sun Tzu in The Art of War It's a 13-chapter book, and the last chapter is on the use of spies. He was very serious about having background information and having everything thoroughly planned in advance. The Mongols, who conquered more than about anyone, they were incredibly they used spies beyond what most people realize. They fully and thoroughly checked out and documented everything about their opponents before they attacked. They were not going in there ignorant. And Sun Tzu, I remember, he said, the movement of an army will cost you 100,000 men and families. To be stingy on the cost and bribery of a few spies is just outright horrible. So understand that. Next thing is stick to your goals. Understand it's easy to get distracted. That's part of focus. Know what your goal was originally. There's a lot of wars where no one has their goal continue to America in Afghanistan, or a lot of the wars in the Middle East, and half the wars and campaigns America's fought in the last 50 years. If you asked 20 Americans what was the goal, they wouldn't know what it was. So you have to have your goal and stick to it. But you also have to be flexible, and maybe something had changed. And I know that's a bad example because there's a lot of other things going on, but understand your goal. If my goal was to hit my opponent in the chin and I keep getting distracted and trash talking or whatever, if my goal is to score baskets in a basketball game and then I end up wanting to dribble more and fancy or whatever, stick to your goal, but be flexible on what's going on. And another thing that's very important in getting what you want and winning battles is be ready for what your opponent might do. I've lost matches because I didn't expect my opponent to do something freaky. Kyle Snyder just lost to the Russian who he'd beaten, Sajalayev, and he said, I never saw that move before. He wasn't ready for that move. I don't think he'll get caught in it again. When Dan Severn fought Rickson Gracie for the first time in the UFC, he got caught in an armbar. He'd never seen that before. He didn't know what it was. He wouldn't get caught in it again. So be ready for what your opponent's going to do. As much as you can. You can't always predict something. So that's why it's also good to have the full scouting report and be ready for that. Which is why you should always pick your own plan apart before you ever go into battle. Think, if I'm going to start a business, what if the interest rate goes up? Is my business dependent on cheap credit? What if my rent goes up? I know in Hawaii, I know many businesses that have failed, because the rent shot up, because rent's so expensive here, and the landlords have such a monopoly on things. You can lease a place, and then the lease will go up 40% next year, and people don't expect that. So pick your own plan apart on all the ways it could go wrong, and that you might have more ways and know your plan better than your opponent, and that might eliminate some nasty surprises for you. That's another trait, is be objective. Don't, it's easy to get all passionate and think, oh, he's going to go down when I hit him. Maybe he doesn't. But I've hit a few people and thought they should just crumple, and they didn't. They just looked at me, and it was strange. I remember I was boxing a guy once, and I hit him. Bam! I smashed his jaw, and he looked at me, and I thought, dang, are these loaded? It was like I had nothing. Funny thing was that particular guy, I hit him in the belly, and he felt it. It was like body punches took him out worse than headshots. So be objective and measure yourself. What is it, the old Clint Eastwood, a man's got to know his limitations, or Sun Tzu in The Art of War. If you know yourself and not your enemy, you will have a loss for every victory. And if you know not yourself nor the enemy, you'll lose every time you take the field. But if you know yourself and your enemy, every time you take the field, you need not fear defeat. So be objective and measure and assess everything pretty careful. The next point, and as the great Nietzsche said, I have gone past the point where luck can befall me. Minimize luck. If one thing you can learn from this is to always minimize luck. If you're counting on luck, the Hail Mary pass, whatever, you have a bad plan. You're not really going to win consistently and counting on. minimize luck. Everything you do should minimize luck. You should be in such good condition that if your opponent's in condition, it won't matter. Fine, it doesn't work. Your footwork should be so good that it doesn't matter. Your jab should be so good you can keep someone away. Your right cross should be so powerful that people are afraid of it. Your whatever, your in basketball, your rebound should be so good it doesn't matter if you miss or not, if the shots are not. Whatever your sport, whatever your business, whatever your event, whatever interaction you're going to have, always minimize the amount luck can play. I used to be, there were some board games and wargaming things, and I used to, when I was younger, I would play them, and I remember there would always be these rolls of the dice where luck would just sweep everything away, and I thought, this is terrible. It's not, it's putting luck, it's into the hands of someone, and that's instead of skill. So the luckier guy wins, and not the more skillful guy. As I've lived life longer, I go, wow, it's better to be lucky than good. Good luck beats everything. So your job is to minimize luck. And I, like so many things with Nietzsche, if you can go past the point where luck could befall you, you'd be the Übermenschen. You would have, no matter when things go sour, you could have that. So that's very important. Another thing is pretty important is select a balanced force to attack with. Tommy Morrison, the Duke, had a great left hook. That's what he had. He didn't necessarily have some of the other things. It's great to have a phenomenal weapon, but also have some balance. I know when I was cornering people for fighting, if somebody couldn't kick, I always made sure they kicked the pad a few times in the warm-ups because I wanted that guy's defenses spread out. If there was a guy good on the ground and not so good standing up, I had him punch. If somebody was good standing up and they weren't so good on the ground, I had him practicing ground stuff. I always wanted to spread out my opponent's defenses so they had to cover everything. If there was a jiu-jitsu guy, and I would make sure they were worried about leg locks, even if maybe somebody didn't do leg locks. So if you have a balanced force that can attack, one of the watching the NCAA championships 2019, Bo Nichols, one of the things about him was there's no way, you were never safe from him. It wasn't like, oh, I'll go upper body and I'll protect myself, or I'll go low and he can't get my legs because he only does leg shots. Or there was no way to protect yourself from him because he was a threat in all areas. He had a balanced force that could go and do many things. The modern military is like that. They have the Air Force and they have the ground troops. They have this. This is the evolution and Darwinian evolution of winners with this has made militaries really look at balanced forces. I believe in business they call this diversification. In investments they call it diversification. So you have a balanced force, so you're not real vulnerable in one area. You want to invest in some high-tech companies. You want to invest in some grandma stocks. You want to invest in some other things. So this is an idea that you can apply to a lot of things. You said it applies. You want to be a threat in all areas if you're attacking, and you want to have a balanced force and be safe in all areas. An army coming in with no air force isn't going to do much. A football team that is all running might have the best running game in the world, but they're not going to do much. A team, there's coaches that say, well, you got to establish the run, then you can pass, which that's an old thing now, and it's kind of outdated, but there is some truth in it even still. And if everyone knows you got to mix up the threat and be a threat in all areas. Football is a good example of that. Basketball is a good example of that. If you are a threat for three-pointers, you've just changed the whole complexion of the game. Have a couple guys in there that can hit the three, you've changed everything. Have a guy that can drive to the basket, you've changed everything. Basketball, football, military, business, all of these are good advice for your interactions to get what you want, to be able to win. You got to think about yourself as this. And that's the thing. You have to have effective weapons. You can't have something that doesn't work. Or everything you do, your jab has to be effective. Your sales force has to be effective, whatever it happens to be. If you're punching and somebody's a great blocker and they're just smothering your punches, well, you better have something else. You better be able to move and hit the ring, and you got to have a weapon that will kill your opponent. You got to have a weapon that will hurt your opponent. You have to have a double leg that's a threat to take anyone down, even on a good day when they can defend it. So that's important too. Next thing, and I'm just kind of rambling a little bit, but you got to know the weakness of your opponents too. It doesn't do any good if you have the greatest double leg, but he can sprawl like a maniac. So that sort of negated that. That's why it's good to be a threat in many areas, have balanced forces, and have effective weapons. And that's why you kind of look at that. And it works with, I said, business the same way. If you are off the road and people have to travel to get to you, you better have some effective advertising. You better have something. A lot of businesses used to halo around Walmart. They'd halo around McDonald's because they knew they'd get the traffic. So understand that. You got to look at where your opponent's vulnerable and hit him there. Dizzy Dean once said, "I hit them where they ain't." And that's real important. That also is an important part in militaries where they concentrated your forces effectively. That was, in World War II, people didn't understand that. And then they would hit a point at one spot and boom, overwhelming force would come through. So that's an important thing of being able to concentrate your forces, which is why mobility is so important in battles, but it's also important in business. If you have a product, widgets, and you can make 1,000 a month, and suddenly there's a demand for 10,000 a month, and your manufacturing capacity is 1,000 a month, you can't concentrate your forces. You can't do anything. You can't take advantage of that. So you're only able to do so much. You do not have an effective weapon. You've got to be able to, but on the other hand, if you have to ramp up to 10,000 a month and suddenly the demand drops, and you now have invested in machinery, rental space, people's pay, you now can't survive a drought. I remember in the 70s, farm prices dropped and a lot of farmers went out of business. And I was talking to my grandfather and I said, "Hey, how are the Amish doing? They are always cutting on the very edge. Are they starving?" And he said, "Oh, they don't starve." And he kind of meant by that as, well, they're never going to get real rich, but they're never going to go bankrupt either. They weren't taking out loans to buy a $100,000 tractor and then having to pay that loan back at 15% interest, and then the price of corn dropped. And so you want to understand that, okay? Another thing that's real important in battle and business is do it to him before he can do it to you. There was a saying, a friend of mine who was a full contact karate guy, but he always said the firstest with the mostest wins. And in full contact karate in those days, it really rewarded the flash attack. This was before the UFC came out and people thought karate was a real effective fighting strategy and technique. But those full contact karate matches did reward who blasted right out of the gate with the first amount attack. And a lot of times that's still pretty good. If you saturated the market at the beginning of it and didn't come later, there's times when when the time Shere Khan was first hit, everybody made a lot of money. Now everybody's burned and won't come to it anymore. The old musical, The Music Man, when they first sold those instruments in the markets and the territories, it was good, but once they've been burned a few times, it doesn't come through. So you got to do it first. So, and that's important too, because morale of your company is easier to keep when you're up than when you're going backwards. So if you're on the move, you're attacking, you're accomplishing something, it's always good. Nothing wins like winning. Nothing succeeds like success. It's almost hubris. You don't. There's a saying, an ill tide, just kind of sinks everybody. So if you can keep that momentum going in morale, and in the military, and I wrote this all out in a book, so I'm kind of skimming it real fast. But one of the most important things, I've looked at battles for the last few 100,000 years, is a lot of times the winning general was the one who committed his reserves at the right time. They didn't throw everything at once, but they didn't hold back too late. Timing is everything, and committing your reserves at the right time to push the balance was very important. That happens in even individual combat. I've watched boxers and fighters when it was time to pour it on, and maybe they just didn't have it in their gas tank. They were too tired to commit their resources. That's one of the reasons having endurance and stamina. A lot of times, in a majority of fights, Diaz and Conor McGregor, just having endurance to have those reserves to come back and apply them when you need them. The Mayweather Conor McGregor fight, even though Conor McGregor was doing something far out of his level of expertise, if he'd had his gas the whole time, he wouldn't have really, you know, he wouldn't have been knocked out. He would have been pretty respectable in his fight, but he just could not. He just didn't have the gas, so he had no reserve. So this section of this lesson isn't about stamina, but it's an example that commit your reserves at the right time. The analogy of an individual fighting, having a big gas tank, lots of stamina, lots of endurance, and being able to have some reserves on call is a lot like a general who commands 10,000 men and lots of battalions and units, and he's able to fight and then bring in another unit, America, the United States of America has reserves, so they're able to wipe out these other countries in battles because of their huge forces. And one of the things too, and this is from Sun Tzu, is recognize when you're beaten. Recognize when it's time to retreat. I've seen boxers who maybe got hurt, and it's hard to know what's the right thing to do every time, but they recognize they're hurt and they start throwing wilder and get hit again and again, and then they're out. Whereas if they'd covered up, clinched, hung on, they maybe cleared their head, they could have done something. Mao Zedong, he was fighting the Nationals, and he hid in the mountains and hid and ran away and hid many times. Vietnam knew when they were and hid. You know, it's he who fights and runs away will live to fight another day. Recognize when you're beaten and move on. Businesses. I know quite a few people that have lost everything. They lost their shirt. They went bankrupt. And if they'd have folded their business 2 or 3 years sooner, when it was all going south, they would have done better. I know people in marriages I know many people that got divorced and they said, well, the mistake I made was waiting as long as I did. I should have recognized when it was going south and gotten out sooner. So, and that's part of being objective. Recognize when you're beaten. Don't keep throwing you could be in a military and throw 10,000 lives away and not change the outcome of the battle at all. And you could throw away your fortune and not change whether your business failed or not. You could, whatever it happens to be. So recognize. Another important point in winning and getting what you want is to press home your victory. One of the best examples of this, I guess, was Joe Louis. I've watched a lot of his fights on YouTube, and I guess he was a great finisher. He knew when somebody was in trouble, and he took them out. So he knew when to press home his victory. Say there's 10 units of effort you have. Well, there's times during a fight where you put those 10 units of effort into play, and it's not going to change much. But there's times when your opponent's a little hurt or a little confused or a little doubtful or he's in a little vulnerable position. You put those 10 units of effort into him now, and you'll finish him. That's sometimes called the killer instinct. It's sometimes called the finisher. And that's something that's really the will to win, the will to finish somebody off. Basketball players have it. I guess Larry Bird was supposed to have it in basketball. He knew when to drive that final nail in, when to make his move for the kill. Even though basketball's not a real deadly game, but boxers, I guess Marciano he knew when, I guess, although I think he was just always trying to kill you during the whole match. And he was one of the guys that apparently had an endless reserve and he was one of those rare individuals who could punch as hard in the 15th round and as fresh as he could in the first round, which makes someone dangerous all the time. But know when to press home your victory. Know when to go for the kill and to really press it home. All right? The next thing I put down is to follow your own rules. Practice what you preach. This is shocking how many times it's come up. I guess I studied a little bit of Robert E. Lee, and the battles he lost is when he quit using his doctrine. There's other people too. It's funny how frequently Napoleon, how many people, Karl von Clausewitz, when people quit doing what got them successful, and throughout what has worked for them and their winning formula. That could be Alexander the Great, and quit doing what it took to win, and then they lost. So be loyal to what got you there. I was hearing Pete Rose once talk about batting. He said, never change your swing. Your swing is what got you to the big leagues. Don't change what's good. Fix what's the little things, and don't fundamentally alter what isn't. What has made you successful. And there are people that do that. Somebody might have the best jump shot, the best whatever, and they change it. I don't know enough about golf to know if on the days Tiger Woods is losing, he's actually changing his swing a little bit from the successful swing he's had all this time, or whoever's doing what. So practice what you preach. Follow your own rules. Keep doing what got you there successfully. Sorry, this is really a long video. I never make them this long, but they have a lot to say about this topic in getting what you want, winning, strategy. It's kind of an overall arching thing, so this is a big one. Didn't mean it to be this big. Any questions? Too much? Overwhelmed your brain? All right. It's in a book, so you can look at it too if you want to get God Total from Godwise Books. Any questions, ask me in the comments. I hope this helps somebody. Thanks.